The words hit harder than the cancer diagnosis had 3 years earlier. I sat at Tessa's polished dining table, the one I'd helped her pick out when she and Adam bought their dream house, staring at the tablecloth I'd ironed that very morning. "Mom, you've become a burden," my daughter said, her voice carefully measured like she'd rehearsed this conversation. Her manicured fingers twisted her wedding ring, avoiding my eyes. Adam leaned forward in his expensive suit, adding weight to her words. "We need our space back, Evelyn. You understand." I understood plenty. I understood that the daughter I'd raised as a single mother, working double shifts to pay for her college education, had just reduced me to an inconvenience. I understood that the son-in-law who'd called me the best mother-in-law ever at their wedding now saw me as furniture that no longer matched their decor. "Of course," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I wouldn't want to be in the way." I left my plate untouched, the roast beef and mashed potatoes growing cold like the relationship I'd thought would last forever. Walking to my temporary bedroom, I began mentally packing the life I'd rebuilt after losing my husband Frank. That was the night I learned blood doesn't always mean family. 32 years of memories flooded back as I folded clothes into the same suitcase I'd used for our family vacations. Tessa at 5, refusing to sleep without her bedtime story. Tessa at 16, crying over her first heartbreak while I held her until dawn. I'd given her everything I never had. Piano lessons when I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. Designer prom dress when I wore the same work uniform for 3 years straight. College tuition when I took out a second mortgage and worked overtime until my hands cramped from typing. After Frank died, she'd insisted I move in with them. "You shouldn't be alone," she'd said, tears in her eyes at the funeral. "We're family. Family takes care of each other." 2 years of helping with their baby, Sophie. 2 years of cooking dinners and folding laundry, and being the live-in grandmother who made their busy lives possible. 2 years of believing I'd found my place in their perfect suburban world. But somewhere between Sophie's second birthday and Adam's promotion, I'd apparently overstayed my welcome. The helpful grandmother had become the aging relative who reminded them of mortality and inconvenience. I gave her everything I never had. I whispered to Frank's photo as I wrapped it in tissue paper. And she couldn't even give me a home when I had nowhere else to go. The next morning, 10-year-old Sophie clung to my leg as I loaded my car with boxes that contained a lifetime reduced to essentials. Her small arms wrapped around my waist with the desperate strength of someone too young to understand adult betrayal. "Nana, don't go," she whispered, her face buried against my coat. "Who's going to read me stories?" My heart broke watching Tessa pull Sophie away with gentle but firm hands. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she murmured, though I couldn't tell if she was talking to me or herself. I knelt down and kissed Sophie's forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'll see you soon, sweetheart," I promised, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. Tessa avoided my eyes as I handed over my house key, the metal warm from being clutched too tightly. "We'll call you," she said, the kind of empty promise people make when they're choosing convenience over conscience. As I drove away from the house where I'd believed I belonged, I caught a glimpse of Sophie's tear-streaked face pressed against the living room window. My rearview mirror reflected the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't see them soon. Some bridges don't just burn, they crumble. The one-bedroom apartment above Marianne's bakery smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. Small comforts that made the walls feel less like a prison. The rent was affordable because the space was tiny, but it included utilities and the kind of neighborhood warmth that money couldn't buy. I arranged Frank's photograph on the narrow windowsill, along with a framed picture of Sophie on her first day of school. The rest of my belongings fit into 2 closets and 3 dresser drawers, my life compressed into functional minimalism. Bills spread across my kitchen table like evidence of poor planning. Social Security covered rent and basic groceries, but little else. Pride had prevented me from asking Tessa for financial help during my 2 years in their house, and now pride was all I had left. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Hope you're settling in okay. We'll call soon." I stared at the message for several minutes, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations require more emotional energy than I had available, and false concern felt worse than honest indifference. "We raised a stranger, Frank," I said to his photograph, wondering how the sweet child who'd once promised to take care of me forever had grown into someone who saw me as a burden to be managed. Job hunting at 62 proved harder than fighting cancer had been. At least cancer had treatment options and support groups. Ageism just had polite rejections and disappointed sighs from hiring managers who thought I was overqualified for positions I desperately needed. "We're looking for someone with more energy," said the manager at the department store, as if enthusiasm could be measured by decades instead of determination. "This position requires significant computer skills," explained the receptionist at the dental office, ignoring my 20-year career in public relations that had ended only when Frank got sick. At the grocery store, I bumped into Patricia, one of Tessa's friends from the country club. Her surprise at seeing me was poorly concealed behind plastic politeness. "Oh, Evelyn. I didn't realize you were still around," she said, her tone suggesting she'd assumed I'd disappeared into whatever void inconvenient elderly relatives occupy. I forced a smile and made small talk about the weather, while she clearly calculated how quickly she could escape this awkward encounter with her friend's discarded mother. I decided if they wanted me invisible, I told Frank's photo that evening, I'd learned to disappear strategically. Some lessons in survival come disguised as humiliation. Marianne knocked on my door 3 days later with coffee, and the kind of straightforward curiosity that cuts through small talk. She was a widow herself, 10 years younger, but carrying the same practical wisdom that comes from rebuilding life after loss. "You've got that sharp look about you," she said, settling into my only comfortable chair. "What did you used to do before retirement?" "Public relations," I answered, surprised by how good it felt to claim professional identity again instead of just being someone's unwanted mother. Marianne's eyes lit up with the kind of recognition that meant opportunity. "Then help me with mine. This bakery's been barely breaking even for 2 years, and I know it's not the bread. My grandmother's recipes could convert vegans." I spent the evening reviewing her business model, customer feedback, and marketing approach. The problems were obvious to someone with my background. Inconsistent branding, no social media presence, and pricing that didn't reflect the quality of her products. Within a month, I'd redesigned her entire customer experience. New signage, updated menu with better descriptions, and a loyalty program that turned casual customers into regular advocates. Most importantly, I'd helped her understand that she wasn't just selling bread. She was selling the comfort of home-baked tradition. Sales doubled in 6 weeks. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than the scent of Marianne's morning pastries. Small business owners who'd been struggling with marketing suddenly had hope in the form of a grandmother who understood both business strategy and customer psychology. The flower shop needed help competing with corporate chains. I showed them how to market custom arrangements for special occasions instead of just selling individual blooms. The family restaurant wanted to attract younger customers without losing their traditional base. I developed a social media strategy that highlighted their grandmother's recipes alongside modern presentation. Each success rebuilt my confidence and bank account simultaneously. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with family obligation and everything to do with professional competence. Then I saw the headline that changed everything. Right Media faces public scandal. Local firm under investigation for financial irregularities. Adam's company, the same business that had funded their beautiful house, expensive cars, and comfortable lifestyle that apparently couldn't accommodate one elderly mother-in-law. I read the article twice, processing details about missing client funds and questionable accounting practices. The irony was delicious. The man who'd called me a burden was about to discover what real burdens felt like. The phone rang at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, jarring me awake from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in months. Tessa's name glowed on my caller ID, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But parental instinct overrides pride, even when that instinct has been severely tested. "Mom, please." Tessa's voice was panicked in ways I hadn't heard since she was a child afraid of thunderstorms. "Adam's company is tanking. The investigation is getting worse. I don't know what to do." The desperation was real, but so was my memory of being called a burden just months earlier. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, processing the implications of her late-night confession. You said I was a burden, remember? I replied calmly, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. Silence stretched between us, filled with all the things neither of us was ready to say. The daughter who'd dismissed me was now asking for help she'd decided I couldn't provide. Mom, I'm sorry. I know we hurt you, but Adam's scared. The lawyers are expensive, and if this gets worse. Her voice trailed off into the kind of fear that money usually buffers against. But curiosity got the better of me. I admitted to myself, even as I told Tessa I'd consider helping them. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory that wouldn't force me to return to their house as a supplicant seeking reconciliation. Tessa looked fragile for the first time in years, her usual polish replaced by the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleepless nights and uncertain futures. Adam sat beside her wearing forced politeness like an ill-fitting suit. His charm had always been surface level, effective with clients but transparent to anyone who'd watched him long enough. We just need help fixing our public image, he said, his tone suggesting this was a minor favor rather than a request for professional salvation. Temporarily, until this investigation blows over. I stirred my tea slowly, letting silence create the kind of discomfort that makes people reveal more than they intended. Tessa fidgeted with her purse strap while Adam checked his phone repeatedly. You want the burden to clean your mess, I said finally, my voice carrying no anger but plenty of clarity about the situation's irony. Adam's jaw tightened, but Tessa had the grace to look ashamed. Mom will pay you. Professional rates. The offer was practical, but the dynamic was priceless. The same people who'd told me I was in the way now needed my expertise to save their reputation. I agreed to help them, but for a fee that reflected both my professional worth and their desperation. Walking into Right Media's corporate offices felt like entering enemy territory disguised as a consultant. The glass and steel building projected success, but I could sense underlying tension in the way employees whispered near copy machines and avoided eye contact with management. Isn't that Adam's mother-in-law? Someone murmured as I passed their cubicle, my professional attire and confident stride apparently confusing their expectations of discarded family members. Adam gave me a tour that emphasized their success, while carefully avoiding areas where financial irregularities might be obvious. But 40 years of public relations had taught me to read between corporate lines and notice what people were trying to hide. I took notes silently, observing workflow patterns and employee interactions that told stories management didn't want told. Stress levels were high, morale was low, and the kind of nervous energy that accompanies investigations hung over everything like professional fog. When people underestimate you, I wrote in my notebook that evening, they forget to guard their secrets. The real treasure was in the financial reports Adam had carelessly left accessible, documents that painted a picture of creative accounting and questionable business practices that went far beyond what the investigation had uncovered. The financial inconsistencies were obvious to someone with my background in corporate communications. Offshore accounts listed as consulting fees. Invoices for services that couldn't be verified. Expense reports that suggested a lifestyle funded by client money rather than legitimate profits. I printed copies of everything, organizing them into a folder I labeled Burden Backup, with the kind of dark humor that comes from watching karma manifest in spreadsheet form. Adam's text to Tessa that evening confirmed my suspicions about their attitude toward my involvement. Keep your mom out of the books. Just let her handle media stuff. Too late for that precaution. I'd already documented enough financial irregularities to understand why investigators were interested in Right Media's accounting practices. The evidence suggested years of systematic fraud disguised as business expenses. Client funds diverted to personal accounts. Inflated invoices for services never rendered. The kind of elaborate deception that requires careful planning and complete confidence that nobody would ever look too closely. But investigations have a way of revealing everything people thought they'd hidden successfully. And Adam's confidence was about to become his liability. I backed up everything to my personal cloud storage, insurance against the possibility that my access might be revoked when they realized how much I'd discovered. Playing dumb became my specialty as I continued consulting for Right Media. When Adam reviewed financial reports during meetings, I asked innocent questions that made him uncomfortable without revealing how much I actually understood. These numbers look off, I mentioned casually, pointing to obviously inflated consulting fees. Want me to double-check the calculations? No need, Adam replied quickly, closing the folder with nervous efficiency. Everything's been audited already. I smiled pleasantly. Of course not. I'm sure you have professionals handling the complex stuff. The condescension in his relief was exactly what I'd expected. Adam had always seen me as Tessa's aging mother, someone too old and unsophisticated to understand modern business practices. His assumption that I couldn't recognize financial fraud was working perfectly in my favor. While he worried about investigators and lawyers, he completely ignored the threat sitting in his conference room taking detailed notes about his business operations. Every meeting provided more evidence of systematic deception. Every conversation revealed another layer of creative accounting designed to hide the fact that Right Media's success was built on other people's money. I documented everything with the patience of someone who'd learned that revenge served methodically tastes better than revenge served hot. The charity gala was Right Media's attempt to rebuild their public image through strategic philanthropy. 500 guests in evening wear, all pretending that the fraud investigation was just a misunderstanding that would blow over with proper legal representation. Tessa gave a speech about family values and community responsibility, her voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced sincerity. At Right Media, we believe family comes first, she announced to enthusiastic applause. I sat in the back, unnoticed among the crowd of business leaders and social influencers who'd paid substantial sums to attend what might be Adam's last public relations victory. We're committed to supporting families in our community, Tessa continued, the irony lost on an audience that didn't know she'd recently evicted her own mother for being inconvenient. Cameras flashed as she accepted a ceremonial check for their charitable foundation, money that investigators would later discover had been funded primarily by client accounts rather than company profits. A journalist leaned over to her colleague, whispering loud enough for me to overhear. That's her mother in the back row, the one they kicked out of their house. The story was spreading through social circles faster than Adam could control it, and public sympathy was shifting in directions he hadn't anticipated. The anonymous tip I provided to investigative journalist Catherine Morrison included financial documents that painted a clear picture of Right Media's creative accounting practices. Not stolen information, just publicly accessible records organized in ways that told an obvious story. Catherine's article appeared 3 days later with the headline, Right Media accused of systematic client fund diversion. Investigation reveals years of financial irregularities. My phone rang within an hour of the article's publication. Tessa's voice was barely coherent through her tears. Mom, they're expanding the investigation. The FBI wants to interview Adam about offshore accounts. How did they find out about the charitable donations? I kept my voice calm and supportive. Then tell the truth, sweetheart. It's always easier to remember than lies. You don't understand, she sobbed. They might arrest him. We might lose everything. The panic in her voice was genuine. But so was my memory of being called a burden when my presence became inconvenient for their perfect life. I understand more than you think, I replied. Sometimes the truth hurts before it heals. She hung up without saying goodbye, probably to call lawyers who specialized in white-collar defense rather than family relationships. 15 ***. Tessa's response to the expanding investigation was predictably desperate and poorly considered. At a hastily arranged press conference, she blamed me for providing false information to journalists out of spite for being asked to move out. My mother leaked fabricated documents because she's angry about our family arrangements, she told reporters, her voice shaking with a combination of fear and misplaced righteousness. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Instead of deflecting attention from Adam's financial crimes, it focused media interest on their family dynamics and the treatment of elderly relatives by successful children. When reporters called for my response, I kept my statement simple and dignified. A mother never lies about her children, but she might protect them from themselves. The contrast between Tessa's desperate accusations and my measured response shifted public sympathy decisively in my favor. Social media exploded with comments supporting grandparents and condemning children who abandon their parents for social convenience. Evelyn Miller shows class while daughter shows character, read one editorial headline. Another columnist wrote, "If Tessa Millerite treats her own mother this way, how does she treat clients who trust her with their money?" The investigation gained public support that made it harder for Adam's lawyers to negotiate favorable settlements. Marianne and the other small business owners I'd helped rallied behind me with the kind of loyalty that money can't buy. They organized a support campaign that generated local media attention and positioned me as a respected community member rather than a vengeful family outcast. Evelyn Miller helped save my business when I was ready to close, Marianne told Channel 7 News. She's got more integrity in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. The flower shop owner added, "She taught me that success comes from serving people, not using them. If her own daughter can't see that, it's her loss." Local newspapers picked up the story, framing it as a tale of resilience and dignity in the face of family betrayal. I became an unlikely symbol for discarded elderly parents and the wisdom that comes from overcoming personal disappointment through professional competence. A major news network called, requesting an interview about family loyalty and intergenerational relationships in modern society. The producer was particularly interested in how I'd rebuilt my life after being abandoned by the daughter I'd sacrificed everything to raise. The opportunity to tell my story on a national platform was too valuable to refuse, especially since it would reach an audience far beyond Adam's ability to influence or control. The CNN interview aired on Tuesday evening, reaching millions of viewers during prime time. I wore my best dress and spoke with the calm authority that comes from knowing you're telling the truth to people who understand the difference. "Family isn't who you live with," I told Anderson Cooper, my voice steady despite the personal pain behind the words. "It's who stands with you when life tries to bury you." I described my experience without malice or self-pity, focusing on lessons learned rather than wounds suffered. The contrast between my dignity and Tessa's public accusations was obvious to anyone watching. "What would you say to other parents facing similar situations?" Anderson asked. "Build your own life," I replied. "Love your children, but don't lose yourself in their expectations. Sometimes the best gift you can give them is your own independence." The interview clip went viral within hours, shared by thousands of viewers who recognized their own family dynamics in my story. Comments poured in from adult children apologizing to elderly parents and grandparents finding courage to demand better treatment. Tessa's business lost 3 major sponsors overnight as public opinion turned against companies associated with her name. Adam's company collapsed under the weight of federal investigation and public scrutiny. Client funds had to be returned, legal fees consumed their savings, and their lifestyle crumbled faster than their reputation. The mansion went on the market with the kind of desperate pricing that suggests forced sale rather than voluntary downsizing. Cars were repossessed. Country club memberships were canceled. The perfect life they'd protected by calling me a burden disappeared piece by expensive piece. Tessa called me from their attorney's office, her voice hollow with defeat. "Mom, please. I don't know what to do. Adam might go to prison. We're losing everything. Sophie keeps asking why we had to move." The desperation was complete now, her confidence shattered by consequences she'd never imagined when fraud seemed like victimless creative accounting. "Then maybe it's time you learn," I said gently, without cruelty but with the kind of clarity that comes from watching karma complete its work. "Learn what?" she whispered. "That family means taking care of each other, not using each other." The next morning, Sophie appeared at my apartment door with a small suitcase, and the kind of determined expression that reminded me of her mother at the same age. "Mom and Dad are always fighting," Sophie said quietly as I helped her unpack her few belongings. "I told them I wanted to stay with you." Mom cried, but she said yes. My heart broke for this child caught between adult consequences and family loyalty. At 10 years old, she was making choices that her parents should have protected her from having to consider. "You're safe here, sweetheart," I promised, tucking her into the small bed I'd hastily assembled in my living room. "We'll figure everything out together." That night, I read her the same stories I'd read to her mother 30 years earlier. creating continuity in a world that had suddenly become unstable and frightening. The next morning, Tessa banged on my door with the desperation of someone whose world was disintegrating faster than she could manage. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her voice raw from crying and sleepless nights. "You're turning my daughter against me," she accused, though her anger felt more like fear than genuine outrage. "I'm teaching her what love looks like," I replied calmly, not moving from my doorway. "Something she apparently isn't learning at home." Sophie appeared behind me, slipping her small hand into mine with the trust that comes from feeling protected rather than burdened. Tessa pushed past me into my small apartment, her presence filling the space with the kind of frantic energy that comes from losing control of everything you thought you owned. "We're losing everything," she said, collapsing onto my couch with the dramatic flair that had characterized her personality since childhood. "The house, the cars, everything. Adam might get 5 years in prison." I moved to my desk and opened the drawer, where I'd kept my insurance policy for months. The folder labeled Burden Backup contained documentation that could destroy what remained of their reputation or provide leverage for negotiation. "I could destroy you with this," I said, sliding the folder across my coffee table. "But I'd rather save you." Tessa's eyes widened as she recognized financial documents that proved her husband's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Evidence that could send him to prison for decades rather than years. "Why?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face for what felt like the first time since childhood. "Because despite everything that's happened between us," I said, sitting beside her on the couch where Sophie had fallen asleep reading, "I'm still your mother." The distinction mattered more than she probably understood yet. Mothers don't abandon their children, even when their children abandon them. The negotiation took 3 days and involved lawyers, accountants, and federal prosecutors who were surprisingly willing to consider alternatives to complete financial destruction. My evidence provided leverage that Tessa's attorneys couldn't have achieved through traditional legal channels. In exchange for my silence about the extent of Adam's fraud, I negotiated majority ownership of Right Media's assets, client contracts, and remaining business relationships. Not as revenge, but as protection for employees who'd done nothing wrong and clients who deserved better service. Adam resigned under pressure, accepting a plea agreement that involved restitution, but avoided prison time. His reputation was destroyed, but his freedom was preserved through my intervention. "You saved him," Tessa said quietly as we signed the final paperwork that transferred control of the company to me. "I saved you," I corrected. "Sophie deserves to know her father, even if he made terrible choices." The reporters who'd followed our story wanted to know how I'd managed to acquire a media company while protecting family members who'd betrayed me. Sometimes the strongest revenge is refusing to seek it, I told them, though the irony of owning the business that had funded their lifestyle wasn't lost on anyone. Legal papers made me majority shareholder of Right Media within 2 weeks of Adam's resignation. The transition was surreal, walking into offices where I'd once been treated as an inconvenient relative, and now held authority over strategic decisions and employee futures. The first staff meeting was awkward but necessary. Employees who'd whispered about my family situation now reported to the woman they'd dismissed as someone's aging mother. "This company will continue operating," I announced to the gathered staff, "but we're going to rebuild our reputation through honest work and ethical practices." Several employees admitted they'd been looking for new jobs, afraid that the investigation would destroy their livelihoods along with management's reputation. "Your jobs are safe," I assured them. "We're going to earn back public trust the same way we'll earn back client trust, one honest project at a time." Reporters surrounded me as I left that first meeting. Their questions focused on how I'd managed to turn family betrayal into business opportunity. "How did you do it?" asked the journalist who'd first covered the fraud story. "I learned that competence outlasts corruption," I replied. "And sometimes the people who underestimate you provide the best opportunities for proving them wrong." Rebranding Right Media into Miller Communications took 6 months of careful strategic planning. The new company focused on helping nonprofits and small businesses, rather than serving corporate clients who could afford creative accounting. We developed programs supporting single mothers building businesses, elderly entrepreneurs starting second careers, and family-owned companies transitioning between generations. Every client represented values I'd learned through experience rather than inherited through privilege. Tessa worked under my supervision, earning her position through competence rather than family connection. The reversal of our roles was obvious to everyone, but I treated her with the professional respect she'd never shown me. "You'll earn your redemption the same way I did," I told her during her first performance review. With work, the transformation was gradual but genuine. Watching her help struggling business owners reminded me of the daughter I'd raised to care about other people's welfare. 6 months after I'd taken control of the company, Tessa finally whispered the words I'd been waiting to hear. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not sorry for getting caught. Not sorry for facing consequences. Sorry for treating me like a burden when I'd been trying to be a blessing." Forgiveness isn't weakness, I learned. It's letting go without letting them forget the lessons that failure teaches better than success ever could. A year after taking over the company, I watched Tessa mentor a young single mother who was starting a catering business. The patience and encouragement she offered reminded me of the woman I'd raised before ambition had confused her priorities. "She's good at this," Sophie observed, watching her mother explain social media marketing to someone who couldn't afford expensive consultants. "She learned from the best teacher," I replied, thinking about redemption and second chances, and the way that character sometimes emerges from consequences. Our family dinners resumed, but in my apartment rather than their former mansion. Sophie helped me cook while Tessa set the table with mismatched dishes that felt more like home than their previous crystal and china. A framed photograph sat on my desk showing 3 generations of women who'd learned that love means staying, not leaving when life gets complicated. We were whole again but changed. Wiser, humbler, and more grateful for relationships based on character rather than convenience. I sat on my apartment balcony that evening, sipping tea while sunlight spilled through windows that overlooked the neighborhood where I'd discovered my own strength. The scent of Marianne's morning baking drifted up from below, mixing with the sound of Sophie's laughter from the next room. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Dinner tonight? My treat." The invitation represented more than a meal. It was acknowledgement that family means showing up, not just when you need something but when you want to give something back. "Maybe," I texted back. "But only if you let me bring dessert." Some traditions are worth preserving, especially ones built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Miller Communications was thriving under ethical leadership. Sophie was excelling in school and developing the kind of confidence that comes from knowing she was loved rather than tolerated. Tessa was rebuilding her character along with her career. Looking back at the night she'd called me a burden, I realized she'd been right about one thing. I had become something that required strength to carry. Not because I was weak, but because carrying others' welfare along with your own takes more courage than most people possess. "They once called me a burden," I said to Frank's photograph, which now shared space with pictures of Sophie's recent achievements. "Now I carry us all with grace."